In the quiet shadows of his final days, Robert Redford, the man the world knew as Hollywood's eternal golden boy, was not thinking about the flashing cameras, the awards, or even the films that etched his name into history. Instead, his trembling voice whispered about love, about the women who had defined his heart, and about the memories he could never let slip away. What if I told you that behind every iconic performance, every red carpet smile, and every carefully guarded secret, there was a hidden story of heartbreak, passion, and loss that Redford carried with him until his very last breath? This isn't the Robert Redford you read about in glossy magazines, or the untouchable legend Hollywood painted for decades. This is the man stripped raw, vulnerable, and exposed, whose life was forever shaped not by fame, but by 6 unforgettable women he could never truly let go of. Some gave him peace, some left him broken, and others burned so brightly in his memory that even decades later he could not stop speaking their names. The truth is, Redford's final words weren't just a goodbye. They were a confession, a haunting acknowledgement of the loves that lifted him, shattered him, and ultimately defined him. And the most shocking part, the story you're about to hear reveals that the greatest role Robert Redford ever played wasn't in front of the camera, but in the secret theater of his own heart. These women were not side characters, they were the plot, the turning points, the tragedies, and the triumphs. And if you think you know who mattered most to him, stay with me, because what comes next will change the way you remember Robert Redford forever. Which of these 6 women do you think had the deepest impact on Robert Redford's life, and why? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. She was not a movie star, not a glamorous Hollywood icon, and not the type of woman the tabloids expected to be linked with Robert Redford, but Lola Van Wagenen was the first to capture his heart, and in many ways the one who would define what love meant to him forever. They married in 1958, long before the world even knew his name, when Redford was still a struggling young man trying to figure out who he was and where he belonged. For over 2 decades, Lola was not just his wife, she was his anchor, his shield against the chaos of fame that would soon swallow him whole. Together they raised 4 children, built a home away from the relentless spotlight, and created a sense of normalcy in a world where normal rarely existed. But even a love that deep can bend under the weight of Hollywood's crushing demands, and by 1985 their quiet divorce sent shockwaves, not through the press, but through Robert himself. He rarely spoke publicly about Lola, but close friends whispered that her absence left a scar he never fully healed from, a wound that stayed hidden beneath the calm, golden boy smile the world adored. What makes this chapter so powerful is not the glamour, but the simplicity. Lola represented a life before the noise, before the flashing lights, before the legend was born. And even in his final reflections, sources suggest that Redford often returned to those early years, remembering the girl who stood by him when he had nothing. Was she the love of his life? He never confirmed it outright, but the silence itself speaks volumes, because sometimes the deepest loves are the ones the world knows the least about. But what happened after Lola left his life would shock even those closest to him. If Lola was the quiet anchor in Redford's early life, then Natalie Wood was the dazzling spark that threatened to ignite a fire he could never fully control. When the two shared the screen in the 1960s, audiences felt something electric, something too real to be just acting. Their chemistry was undeniable, and whispers quickly spread that the connection extended far beyond the cameras. Hollywood insiders spoke of glances that lingered too long, conversations that seemed too personal, and a magnetic pull between them that couldn't be ignored. Yet, as powerful as their bond appeared, it was also fleeting, fragile, and surrounded by circumstances that made it impossible to last. Natalie, already a Hollywood darling, carried her own burdens and secrets, while Robert was still defining who he wanted to be. The tragic twist came years later, when Natalie's mysterious passing shocked the entire world. Her untimely death left unanswered questions that still echo in Hollywood lore. But for Robert Redford, it cut deeper. It was a haunting reminder of a love that slipped away too soon. Friends close to him recalled that Natalie's memory lingered in conversations even decades after her death, as though a part of him had been frozen in time alongside her. He never sensationalized her story, never cashed in on her tragedy, but the quiet weight of her absence spoke louder than words ever could. In his final years, some say he reflected not just on their on-screen brilliance, but on the what-ifs that would forever remain unresolved. Could Natalie have been the great love that got away? We will never know for certain, but what's clear is that she marked him in ways that outlived both their careers. And if you thought this chapter was tragic, wait until you hear what happened when Redford stood face to face with another powerhouse, Barbra Streisand. When Robert Redford stood opposite Barbra Streisand in The Way We Were, something extraordinary happened. Their energy collided like two stars exploding on screen, leaving behind a glow that audiences could never forget. It wasn't just acting, and it wasn't just chemistry. It was raw, raw, unfiltered magnetism that made millions believe they were watching two souls fall in love in real time. Behind the scenes, whispers spread like wildfire. Could this on-screen romance have bled into real life? The truth is, Redford and Streisand were opposites in every possible way. She was fiery, bold, and unafraid to dominate a room, while he carried himself with calm restraint, measured words, and an almost painful shyness when it came to emotions. That contrast was exactly what made their pairing legendary. Insiders claimed Streisand was captivated by Redford's quiet strength, while he admired her fearless intensity, yet both seemed to know that a real romance between them could never survive the weight of expectation. Still, fans never stopped speculating, and Streisand herself admitted years later that Redford was the one who slipped away, a man who stirred feelings she struggled to put into words. For Redford, the film wasn't just another role. It was a reminder of how powerfully two people can connect, even if only for a fleeting moment in time. And as he looked back on his life in later years, those who knew him believed that Barbra remained a figure of what could have been, a reminder that some bonds are too powerful to ignore, yet too impossible to keep. Their story was not one of scandal, but of longing, restraint, and timeless allure. And if you thought this pairing was unforgettable, wait until you see what happened when Redford let himself be consumed by one of the most fiery romances of his entire life with Sonia Braga. Do you believe Natalie Wood was truly the love that got away, or was it Barbra Streisand? If Barbra Streisand was the one that slipped away, then Sonia Braga was the wildfire Robert Redford willingly stepped into, knowing it could consume him. Their connection in the late 1980s wasn't built on quiet stability or restrained longing. It was built on intensity, passion, and a raw attraction that those close to them described as almost dangerous. Sonia, already famous as one of Brazil's most magnetic stars, was the kind of woman who carried a storm with her everywhere she went, fiery, unpredictable, and impossible to tame. Redford, the steady golden icon of Hollywood, found himself drawn into her orbit like a moth to a flame, unable to resist the pull of her energy. Friends recalled that their romance burned so brightly it couldn't possibly last, and some even suggested that Redford, who had always been careful and deliberate, seemed almost reckless in her presence. It was as if Sonia unlocked a side of him the world never saw, a man unafraid of chaos, a man willing to gamble with love even if it meant heartbreak. But inevitably, what burns hottest also burns out fastest, and their relationship, though unforgettable, could not endure. For Redford, it became a memory of passion without permanence, a reminder of the side of himself that longed for danger, but knew he was destined for peace. Yet even years later, the echo of that affair lingered, because sometimes the loves that nearly destroy us are the ones we secretly remember most. As one friend once put it, Sonia was not the woman he built a life with, but she was the woman he could never forget. And as powerful as that flame was, it only set the stage for what came next. The woman who would finally bring him lasting peace and stand beside him when the world faded. Sibylle Szaggars. After years of heartbreak, fleeting romances, and memories that felt more like unfinished chapters than completed stories, Robert Redford finally found what he had been searching for all along: peace. And that peace came in the form of a German artist named Sibylle Szaggars, a woman who was nothing like the high-profile names Hollywood tried to pair him with. Sibylle wasn't chasing fame or fortune. She lived for art, for creativity, for the quiet moments that whispered louder than any red carpet applause. When she entered Redford's life in the early 1990s, something shifted in him. For the first time, he didn't need to perform, didn't need to protect himself behind a wall of charm or secrecy. With her, he could simply be Robert, the man, not the legend. They married in 2009 in a quiet ceremony in Germany, far away from flashing cameras, and built a life together in the mountains of Sundance, surrounded by the nature he loved so deeply. Friends said Sibylle gave him what no one else could: stillness, balance, and the kind of companionship that grows stronger with age instead of fading. And in his final days, she was there holding his hand, protecting his dignity, and reminding him that love doesn't always have to be turbulent to be unforgettable. This was the chapter of contentment, the love story without spectacle, the one that endured when all the others had burned out or broken apart. And when Redford took his last breath, it was Sibylle who stood beside him, ensuring that his final memory was not of loss, but of the peace he had spent a lifetime searching for. Yet even with that serenity, there remained one connection that never turned into romance but carried the weight of decades: a bond with Jane Fonda that blurred the line between friendship and something more. For decades, audiences swore Robert Redford and Jane Fonda were destined for each other, that their on-screen chemistry was too natural, too effortless to be anything but real. From Barefoot in the Park in the 1960s to Our Souls at Night more than 50 years later, every time they shared the screen, it felt less like acting and more like two hearts slipping into a rhythm only they understood. Fans weren't wrong to sense something deeper, because Redford and Fonda's connection was undeniable, yet it never crossed the line into romance. romance. Why? That's the mystery that fueled countless rumors for decades. Jane herself once admitted she had a crush on Robert, calling him the best kisser she ever worked with, while Redford, always reserved, deflected with his usual quiet charm. Some insiders believed timing was the culprit. Each was often tied to other relationships, each wary of risking a friendship that had become sacred. Others speculated that Redford, who valued privacy above all else, avoided complicating one of the most important collaborations of his career. Whatever the reason, their bond became something unique, a partnership that outlasted Hollywood gossip, built on trust, respect, and a deep affection neither ever denied. When Redford passed, Jane's tribute revealed just how much he meant to her. Words filled with admiration, sorrow, and gratitude for the decades they shared, even if it wasn't in the way fans always dreamed. In many ways, Jane Fonda was the eternal what if, the love story that never bloomed but still defined an era of cinema and an era of Redford's life. And sometimes the greatest romances are the ones that never happen at all, because they live forever in imagination, untainted, untouchable, eternal. But Redford's life wasn't just about the women, it was about how those connections shaped the man behind the legend. And in his final goodbye, those memories spoke louder than any Hollywood script ever could. Do you think Robert and Jane Fonda ever secretly wanted more than friendship, or was their bond stronger because it stayed platonic? For every confirmed love in Robert Redford's life, there were whispers, rumors that clung to him like shadows, never fully proven, never completely dismissed. Hollywood in the 1960s and 70s was a breeding ground for speculation, and Redford's quiet, reserved nature only fueled the curiosity. Some said he shared secret sparks with actresses he worked with but never pursued, while others insisted he carried private affairs so discreet that even the press couldn't track them. There were whispers of fleeting connections during film shoots, of late-night conversations that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling, of women who claimed he left a mark on their lives but whose names were never officially tied to him. Redford himself never confirmed these stories. He was a man who believed in privacy above spectacle, but insiders often suggested that behind the calm surface was a man who lived, loved, and lost far more than the public will ever know. And maybe that's the most fascinating part. For all the light cast on his career, there were corners of his heart that remained in shadow, untold chapters that only he and a few trusted souls truly understood. It's those mysteries that make him larger than life, not because they can be proven, but because they remind us that legends are built not just on what we see, but on what we never truly uncover. In the end, those rumors form part of the mythos of Robert Redford, adding layers of intrigue to a man who was always more than just a star. And yet, even with all those whispers, it's the 6 women we've already explored who stood above the noise, shaping him in ways that time and speculation could never erase. As the curtain falls on the story of Robert Redford's loves, what we are left with is not just a portrait of a Hollywood icon, but of a man whose heart beat just as fiercely as his art. Lola gave him roots. Natalie left him haunted. Barbra showed him the power of restraint. Sonia awakened his wild side. Sibylle granted him peace. And Jane offered him a friendship so profound it blurred the lines of love itself. Together, these women were the silent scriptwriters of his life, shaping the man behind the legend, leaving scars, healing wounds, and gifting him moments that even time itself could never erase. And when Redford's final days came, those memories weren't background noise, they were the spotlight of his goodbye, the loves he could never let go of, the truths he carried to the very end. But here's the twist. Love wasn't the only thing Redford spoke of in his final reflections. In those last emotional moments, he revealed something else, something tied to a friendship that defined not only his career, but his soul. That revelation shook those who were closest to him. And when you hear it, it will forever change how you see Robert Redford, not just as a star, but as a man. Do you agree that sometimes the greatest romances are the ones that never actually happen? Stay tuned, because our next story will take you deeper into the heart of that secret, one that has rarely been spoken of, and once revealed, you'll never forget it. This is just the beginning. If you felt the weight of Redford's story tonight, then make sure you subscribe to Vintage Spotlight, where Hollywood's hidden truths are never forgotten, only rediscovered. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we bring legends back to life.